Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I want to recognize in the audience Mr. David Kilgore. You know, he was my colleague for many years. He's taught me a lot about Sri Lanka, and you know, I really admire David because most people, when they stop being MPs, they retire and have a bit, you know, a life of relaxation. I want to know when David's going to do that. He's still, in fact, I think he works even harder now for us. So, David, it's great to have you in the audience. So, for me, when I was asked to be here, I was really thrilled because I have just come back from Sri Lanka. I spent 10 days in Sri Lanka, and I work on a regular basis with Sri Lankan women. And so when I was asked, I was not modest in saying, this is what I want, this is where I need to be, this is where I need to come and tell you what I saw in Sri Lanka. And I truly believe that it is the Sri Lankan Canadian and the Canadian communities that are going to bring reconciliation in Sri Lanka. And we have a lot of work to do, and we have to do it one step at a time. And, you know, I have been involved in many war situations. I was the envoy for Canada in the Sudan. And the wars and the problems I saw, in the end, there had to be an agreement. In the end, there had to be reconciliation. And, you know, war just destroys. And it's better to have not that great a peace process than a peace process. And, you know, when I was in Kandy and when I was traveling up from Colombo to Kandy, we were stopped in many places. We went to some houses. And the number of women who said to us, we're not happy with what has happened, we're not happy with what's, but at least now we have peace, we have more, thank you, we can start building our lives. And so I agree that there are some terrible injustices that have happened, but I want to share with you some ideas of what we, as I call myself Sri Lankan, but as I'm not, but as what we as Canadians can do. I was just telling somebody, for years and years, I was a refugee lawyer, and the majority of my clients were from Sri Lanka, Burghers, Muslims, Sinhalese, and Tamils. So I think I know every little corner of Sri Lanka. And so it's a real pleasure for me to be here. And right off the bat, I will tell you that, so that you know where I come from. I'm not for sanctions. Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not for sanctions because I have seen that sanctions just hurt the people that, the people who we want to hurt don't get hurt. And it's the people in the villages that get hurt. I think we have to get in there, we meaning us, the Canadian Sri Lankan community, and find ways in building reconciliation. And let me tell you that Canada was very much in the forefront in 2000 when Resolution 1325, it's my belief, happened because of the great work that David and his colleagues did at the UN. And it was really, Canada does not get enough credit for the tremendous work they did in bringing about Resolution 1325 at the UN. And what Resolution 1325, I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain that to you because it's I believe, a very important tool in bringing together communities. I'm sorry, I have a really bad cold. What Resolution 1325 recognized is that, you know, in the olden times, wars happened in battlegrounds outside the community, and then the soldiers came back and then came back into the communities. We know that today, wars happen within the community. They destroy the very structure of our communities, and they absolutely, you know, destroy the family structures and affect women and children in a worse way than anyone else. And so Resolution 1325 recognizes that what it does is the impact of armed conflict on women and girls. And the resolution recognizes the need for measures to protect women from violence in situations of armed conflict. And what is really important about Resolution 1325, and I encourage you to use this tool, is that it really asks for women to become participants in the peace process, in the reconciliation. And if I can give you an example, I was Canada's envoy to the Sudan from 2002 to 2006. And as an envoy, first when I got involved, we were talking about the peace process in, between the South and the North. And I was part of those negotiations, but I arrived sort of in the middle of those negotiations, and I would ask all the time, you know, where are the women? Where are the women? There may be 1 or 2 women taking notes, but there were no women sitting around the reconciliation process. And then unfortunately, Darfur, that's Western Sudan, there was conflict in Darfur, and then the peace process started in Abuja. By that time, I had come to know the parties really well, the UN officials well, the different governments that were working. And when we were setting up the peace process, I looked around the room and said, I'm the only woman here. What's wrong with this? How can we have a peace without half the population being at the peace process? And what had happened is that the UN sent planes all around Europe to pick up men who had been exiled to come to the peace process in Abuja. And so I had the nerve to ask the UN people, well, why don't you send the same plane to the refugee camps in Darfur and pick up women? And today we don't have the time, but to cut the long story short, they did pick up 17 women from the refugee camps and brought them to Abuja for the peace process. And that completely changed the peace process. It changed it because women look after different needs in society than men. So for example, when they were talking about water rights, they were really fighting over water rights, and this woman who had never said a word got up and she absolutely mesmerized the whole room because she said, what you're fighting over doesn't exist. That water, it's not even there now. It's dried up. Let's move on. And you know, it brought a different perspective. And then the women would first say, okay, what about the food in the camps? Not what will happen when peace arrives. So women bring a different perspective. And what we used to get that, to get women to come to the peace process, was Resolution 1325. And as you heard Hillary Clinton talk about, after Resolution 1325, there is another resolution that's come up, and that's Resolution 1820. And Resolution 1820 specifically speaks about the abuse, the sexual abuse of women, and how to deal. It says that the rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute a war crime, a crime against humanity, or a constitutive act with respect to genocide. Because we know that many, including sadly in Sri Lanka, women have been very brutally assaulted, and so this resolution makes it, 1325 talks about women have to be at the peace table. Women have to be part of the peace process. Women get terribly impacted by war. 1820 talks about that sexual violence is a war crime. And then there is 1888, another resolution that strengthens 1820, where the Secretary General has talked on sexual violence in conflict, and further talks about sexual violence absolutely not being accepted. And then there is the Resolution 1889. So Resolution 1325 has had a number of factors being added to it. And I want to say to you that when I was, besides being the envoy to the Sudan, I was the envoy on Resolution 1325. And I used to travel all across the world talking about Resolution 1325. And Canada had a very active committee of parliamentarians, NGOs, and women involved in these issues. We were really in the forefront talking about these issues. Sadly, we've lost that place. And what I found is that for the first time, people were saying, yes, women have to be involved in this process. The tool was 1325. The tool was 1325. And I always tell people that the best peace process under 1325 that existed was in Sri Lanka. In 2005 and 4, I was in Colombo, and I met with civilian women. And at that time, when the peace process was still in place, the Sri Lankan government had brought women activists from all over Sri Lanka, the women who really knew issues. I don't think any other government has done that. Women who really knew the issues to help them, advise them on issues of women. Sadly, they weren't part of the peace process. And the LTTE had brought women in to advise them on the peace process. And what was very interesting is neither of these women's groups had to deal with their side. They dealt with the peace, the Norwegian peace negotiator. So they spoke to the Norwegian peace negotiator, and I thought that was an amazing process. So they didn't get, they didn't get intimidated by their sides. And the civilian women didn't have power. The Sri Lankan women who were on the civilian side didn't have power. The LTT women were very powerful. They had power. So the civilian women would tell the LTT women, let's do this, and they would be able to bring it in place. Sadly, the peace process broke down, and so this didn't go further. But I always think that that was the most powerful peace process that I had seen that Sri Lankan government and LTT had set up, where they had brought, LTT had women who could speak very forcefully within them, and the Sri Lankan government had women who knew the issues well. And unfortunately, the peace process broke down, so everything fell apart. I have still continued to be involved in Sri Lanka for over 20 years, working in Sri Lanka, and I was there just last month for 10 days. And I have come away with some optimism. You may not see it that way, but I want to tell you that I have come away with some optimism. What has happened is that with the help of the Norwegian government, and a little bit of help from the Canadian government, but mainly from the Norwegian government, some of the women activists that I have worked with for many, many years have gone around from Jaffna to many, many different places, and they have talked about Resolution 1325, how to be part of reconciliation, how to be in the process. And the government has let them do it. At one point, we went to a place, I'm not going to name the place, but a place near Kandy, and a few hours away from Kandy, we had army escorts that they wanted to see exactly what we were doing. We had army escorts that were going to be monitoring what we said, but we met with women who were affected by these things. And luckily for us, the army that was accompanying us got diverted, I won't go into the details, to another thing. So we were able to have a private meeting with the women, and we were able to really talk to the women as to what's happening there. So things are happening in Sri Lanka. Things are changing. I have brought the speech to share with you, because there isn't enough time, and you don't really want to hear my speech that I made in Sri Lanka, but I brought copies of it if you're interested in what I was saying. I was only given 10 minutes to speak, but the women said to me, it's really important that you give the strong message, because you will be leaving. And we are here, so we don't want to be threatened by what we said. So they told me what to say, and I said it in the best way I could. The president was supposed to be there, but unfortunately he had to go out of the country. But the prime minister, a lot of officials were there, and we at length talked with the prime minister about bringing Resolution 1325 into the process. Sadly, the prime minister is not as strong as the president, so I don't know what will happen. But there were many, many other parliamentarians in the room, and I, spoke to many people about the peace process. And apartheid has been mentioned a number of times here, and I want to jump to this because I actually think, as I started my speech, that the peace process will happen when we get involved. Canadian Sri Lankans get involved. A real reconciliation will happen. And that will happen if we focus, we come together. And so I think first peace process needs to happen here. The reconciliation between the communities needs to happen here. When I was the envoy for 1325, I traveled across Canada and brought Tamil and Sinhalese women together. And I produced a report that the women wrote, Ripples in the Ocean. And I truly believe that we here have to do a reconciliation. We should not be working separately, that we are Tamils, we are Sinhalese, we are Burghers, we are Muslims. Here in Canada, we do things differently. We are inclusive. Yeah, we have problems. It's not as inclusive sometimes as we'd like it to be, but there is a place for us all. We have learned from that experience. So I believe that this conference, the next step you have to take is to bring the different voices of the different communities of Sri Lanka, within our country together, and do a reconciliation here, and then recreate it in Sri Lanka. Many times, and today also people talk about the apartheid process, but it wasn't magic. It just didn't happen. South Africa didn't just get independence just like that. Let me share a personal story. I was at university. I'm an African. I come from Uganda. And I was at university in London, and we were having protests about apartheid on South Africa on Trafalgar Square. And I still have marks on my back from a horse, or police horse, that hurt me. But when we were involved in those protests, people used to say to us, "You are dreaming. You are dreaming. This, there will never be a different South Africa. You're absolutely dreaming." I led the protest in London against the Barclays Bank, which had a lot of interest in South Africa. And when we were protesting, and then after a while at the headquarters of the Barclays Bank, the president of Barclays Bank asked me to go to see him, and he looked at me and said, "You're just wasting your time. Go back and study. You're a foreigner here. Why are you making all this noise? This is never going to happen." And for me, the absolute moment was when Nelson Mandela left the jail, and when he waved. To me, whenever I am depressed, I get emotional, I'm sorry. Whenever I'm depressed and think, this will never happen, to me, the absolute moment was when he waved. And I always feel that nobody can change. Nobody can change that moment, but nobody can stop us from changing the world. And so I come to all of you, and when people say, "Oh, it's not possible," it's not possible. I come to you and say, I was in Colombo, in Kandy, in other places. I saw Tamil women, Burgro women, Muslim women, Sinhalese women come together. I heard their stories. I'm a mother, so it's very hard for me to hear of a Sinhalese woman who says, "I had 4 young men who were soldiers, and 3 have not come. And for years, she's looking to see where they are. They've disappeared." I don't care she's Sinhalese. She's a woman who's lost 3 sons. It absolutely tears my heart when I hear from a Tamil woman who says, and I won't go into it because I won't be able to finish my story of the brutalization her daughters have suffered at the hands of the soldier. As a mother, I feel the pain of both the women. And so I stand in front of you and say that there are 3 things that we should be doing. And you are the most privileged Canadian Sri Lankans. There cannot be any one more privileged than you. You have an amazing education. You have some resources. And you certainly have the know-how to bring the community. And I am asking you today, before you leave, to decide to focus on reconciliation of our community here. Focus on it. Really, put aside, because no matter how much we fight, sooner or later, we are going to have to come together. I've been in, and today it doesn't permit me to, I've been in Israel, I've been in Palestine talking about reconciliation. It's not been achieved there. And in so many parts of the world where I have come to the conclusion, no matter how much fighting we do, in the end, we are going to have to come together for reconciliation. It's in your hands now to start the reconciliation here. The second thing that I have come to realize is that we have to talk about healing. Whether, the Aboriginal people have an amazing way of they bring people after a dispute for a healing circle. We have to find a way to reconcile. And thirdly, it will be the Sri Lankan women, I'm absolutely convinced, that will use Resolution 1325, and I already see that happening. When I was there in Colombo in December, I saw them using, that resolution has been signed by every country. It was a unanimous resolution, and every country has to abide by it. And just on a side, we are using 1325 to tell our government now that they've gone to train in Afghanistan, that are you using 1325 to have our soldiers, train our soldiers on 1325, and then have them train the security forces in Afghanistan? It's a very powerful resolution. And so I ask that you look at how we bring the young girls, the women together to build reconciliation. I want to leave this thought with you. I'm very much for talking about harmony. Sri Lankans have had war for so long, and as I told you, when I was traveling across to Kandy and stopping at the spots, people were saying to me, for a change now, we are having some kind of resources. We are now starting to see tourists. We are seeing a change in lives. So they're starting to build harmony. And I look to all of you to build that harmony, because if it's not you, who will it be? If it's not me, who will it be? If it's not us, who will be the people who will start the harmony? And I want to leave this thought with you that, when I was a little girl, my mother wanted me to play the piano, and my father wanted me to be the politician, and you can see that who won out. And when I used to practice the piano, my mother used to say to me, practice, practice, and I hated it. So to annoy her, I sometimes just played on the black keys, and sometimes I just played on the white keys. And I ask you to try it. It's not really good at harmony. And I used to really annoy her, and she used to tell me, play both on the black and white keys. Don't do that. The sound is just not very good for my ears. And only when I started working on 1325, I realized what she meant. To have real harmony, you're going to have the Tamils, the Sinhala, the Burghers, the Muslims come together. Sri Lanka is a small island, but its people are amazing. And I'm not saying that because I'm standing in front of you. I know that. I've been there. I worked with you all. I know there is nobody more resourceful than the Sri Lankan people. You're being held back by this conflict. You are being held back by the progress of the country. The peace of the country is being held back by this conflict. We have to make sure that the rights of the Tamils are addressed. We have to make sure that the abuses are to be addressed. But to do that, we can't say, I'm not going to play marbles with you if you don't do what I ask. So I don't agree with, and you may not agree with me, but that's fine, Prime Minister Harper when he says, I'm not coming to Sri Lanka. We close the door to negotiations if we are not there at the table. We have to be at the table. Canadians know how to build harmony. We have to use that value so that we can create harmony. Thank you very much.